Okay. Maybe it's the snow. Did you see that it started to snow?
Yes.
Okay.
Yesterday already. Yeah. I don't know whether.
We were so happy. My children were so happy.
And do you expect to ski? Because I know last year a lot of my students felt it was a kind of crisis that they couldn't ski. Do you expect there to be enough snow to ski?
Not really. Not here.
Well, it depends if you can decide on a very short notice before you go.
Or at very short notice, usually. Yeah. Well,
Do you ski?
I do not ski, no. Well, I have, but it's not typical in Britain. You can ski in Scotland. There are some parts of Scotland where you can ski, but otherwise you have to go to France or Austria or something like that. Yeah.
The downhill skiing, but if you want to do the
Cross country?
It's really not popular.
No.
No,
That's true.
I know it is strange, but we think we associate it with Austrian mountain men or something, like Swiss people or something. We just don't think about it. Aye. Well, have you read the articles? Okay. Well, three different views on Europe. Ivana, if you were to summarise the points in this article about the separatist movement in Spain.
Well, the article summarizes the situation in Spain, saying that Catalonia voted on independence, and as a result of the election is that they voted for independence on Spain. On the other hand, the independence or the secession.
And here we would say independence without the article.
Yeah. Is not possible according to the constitution of Spain. So now nobody actually knows what will happen. And
what about the implications for Europe?
The implications for Europe would be, or the implications for Catalonia, if they become independent, would be that they could not be members of the European Union. They cannot accede to the European Union. And also this could steer other nations to more separatist movements. Such, for example, in Italy, Belgium, or Germany, or the United Kingdom.
And they used a particular term to talk about these separatists near the end, as this general issue of being focused only on your own issues.
A particular town.
Sorry?
Did you say a town?
Term.
Term. Oh, I can't recall the term.
In the last paragraph, being focused specifically on your issues to the exclusion of other issues. Particularism.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a term you're going to hear every day. Okay. Okay. Nothing much really to comment on the register or language, I don't think.
Well, there have been quite a lot of words that I would like to ask about, actually. The first one is televised address.
Mhm.
How do you use the word address? Because it could be also a speech or
Well,
anything, but when do you use address? Is it
when it's formal.
official?
When it's a formal official use, like the president's address to the nation.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You could use it slightly less formally
Is it also
as a verb.
solemn?
Sorry?
Is it also solemn? Or, I mean,
Yeah, yes, it would be.
it would be-
So yes, it would be used for serious events, but also it could be, like, every year in the States the president does the State of the Nation. You could call that the presidential address.
Mhm. Okay.
As I see, using it as a verb, you could use it slightly less formally.
Mhm.
You could say they addressed the crowd or something like this.
Mhm.
But at a rally or something, you could say someone addressed the crowd. But here it would be pretty formal.
Mhm. And how about the word seceding? Seceding. Yeah.
Yes, seceding.
How do you use it? Because I haven't seen it before. And
Well, you talk about seceding when you're actually breaking away from a formal union. So, for example, at the time of the American Civil War, the southern states were often known as secessionist states. They were part of a union, and then they broke from that. They formally withdrew from that union or removed themselves from that union. It'd be much the same in Catalonia. I think we would normally use it where we actually think of something already existing as a union. So, for example, if the Czech Republic chose to divide itself north and south, we probably wouldn't think of that as a secession because we don't think of those two parts at the moment as being unified in the ways the Czech Republic and Slovakia were unified.
how about the situation in Ukraine? Would you call it? Would you say that Crimea has?
I think yes, you would definitely refer to that as secession because Crimea always had its own uncertain identity and it had historical ties with Russia. It would have been the same in Scotland. But of course, the difference also, if you compare the Velvet Revolution, is it was an agreement between both sides,
Yes.
whereas secession would be a unilateral withdrawal.
So the UK is going to secede from the European Union. Is that?
You could say that, yeah.
Could say that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's one of the things we'll come to, whether or not that will happen.
And my last question is to regards the word fellow. I know what it is, but again, I don't use it. And it is on the second page, in the paragraph below the gap. Public policy teaching fellow. Why fellow in this context?
In that context, it would be because they would be part of an academic association.
So a member.
Yeah,
Just
but
member.
in some of the highly prestigious universities, you're actually formally part of a kind of academic association when you have certain positions in their school. And so it implies it's a very respected academic position.
Could I say also scholar?
You could, but you see, when I say fellow, for example, if you're a member of a very prestigious academic institution, like for example the College of Veterinary Surgeons or something, you could be a member. Well, every vet in the UK would be a member of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, but to be a fellow would be one of the very senior positions. I was going to ask one question in the very first paragraph about stoking fears.
The Britain
when it says stoking fears, stoking in the very first paragraph, the first sentence. Well, yeah, you stoke a fire, yeah, so it's okay, igniting would be the very first moment. Stoking would sound like it's deliberately, deliberately inflaming fears. Or certainly increasing them. As you'll see, this came from Time magazine, and so apart from checking for the occasional typo, I didn't change too much, but I highlighted a sentence here in the beginning of the fifth paragraph. Experts say, yes. So anything you would remark on about that sentence? It's actually a very minor point, and it's well, experts say the chances of Catalonia actually successfully seceding from Spain are highly unlikely. Yeah, you could argue that. No, you could argue that stylistically it's now okay, but in the past it would seem you wouldn't normally have said the chances are unlikely. You would say it is unlikely or the chances are low. Normally. But the chances are slim. Are there any other points of language here?
Well, I have a point. It's more about the argument or stylistics. I don't know. I don't really understand in the paragraph that we were just talking about, the one which comes after it, starting with Catalonia. They say that Catalans pay more in taxes to Madrid, but then they say their government has gone into debt to Madrid. I don't understand that. How can they be? How can they owe something to Madrid if they pay more than their respective portion?
Because they had to take a loan from the central government, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, they have some, because they have what we would call devolved government in Spain. I think all their tax revenue goes to Madrid and is centralised, and they receive a proportion in return. They don't. As I understand it, they don't get to generate their own taxes and use them as they see fit. I think they have to submit their taxes to the Madrid Treasury, which allocates blocks of funding back to Catalonia. So although they were, as they would say, net contributors, they must still have had to borrow money from the Treasury over and above their allowed budget. I mean, there is something similar in the UK, and one of the key issues over devolution in the UK is whether or not Scotland and Wales should be allowed to generate have complete control over taxes and control their budgets that way. But actually what happens at the moment, although it's slightly changing, they've got limited tax raising powers, but they get blocks of money from London, from Westminster, and they have to manage the budget within that. So anything over and above, in theory, they would have to borrow it from central government.
Does Scotland is a net contributor?
That's an extremely complex argument, because the people who are in favour of independence insist that it is very much a net contributor, and others argue the opposite.
So there's no objective truth to that news. You can't say that the figures show it is a net contributor or a net loser, or I don't know.
Who was it said there are lies, damned lies in statistics? Have you ever heard that expression? There are lies, damned lies in statistics.
Can you write it down?
For some reason I'm associating it with somebody like Harry Truman or something, but I can't remember.
You left out to TI in statistics.
So during the Scottish independence debate, there were eminent economists on both sides saying that Scotland would be, on the one hand, one of the richest countries in the world, and on the other hand would face economic ruin.
May I just go back to that point?
Sure.
I don't think it's just raised. They don't receive much of that spending. Means they don't receive much of that money.
I think from the overall budget.
And that's from the overall spending in,
fraction.
in the sense of the money, not the real spending.
Well, you talk about government spending. You know, whatever the government invests, you refer to as government spending, usually.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, let's look at these collocations. What would you say for the first one? The possibility that Catalonia would break apart from Spain and form its own independent state has gained what?
Approaches.
Traction.
It would be gained traction. I mean, traction and purchase can actually mean virtually the same thing in different terms, but in literal terms, traction and purchase can be virtually the same. Because this is purchase as in gripping something through friction. Yeah. Well, you often talk about an idea gaining traction.
Could I say also gain momentum in this context?
You could say gained momentum, and it would mean virtually the same thing. In this context, to all intents and purposes, it would mean the same. But of course, if you talk about something gaining momentum, perhaps it suggests it's more dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas something is gaining traction, it's perhaps it's solidifying.
Mm-hmm.
But virtually the same.
And both are neutral. They can be used in positive as well as negative meaning.
Yes, definitely. Okay. And the political push to gain independence started in earnest. When something. So, what do we mean if something begins in earnest? Yeah.
Determined.
Sorry.
It started to be determined.
You could also say that denotes a certain determination. There's no real reason why you couldn't say it began in seriousness, but you just wouldn't. Just by inhabit, you would say something began in earnest. Again, the next one, you could argue that any of the three could be used, but which would we normally use for this next?
Mount.
Yeah, we talk about mounting frustrations. What would we perhaps use rise with?
Fear.
Rising fears, rising tensions. You could talk about mounting tensions as well.
Mm-hmm. Decline.
Theoretically, although it would sound a bit unnatural.
Mm-hmm.
You could talk about it caused frustrations to climb, but somehow climbing frustrations wouldn't sound right.
Mm-hmm.
I think the next one's probably quite obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes, worst case scenario. It's simply a fixed expression. Next one might not be so obvious.
Very.
Yes, the very nature of the European project itself. So what does it mean if you talk about the very nature of something? Why are you using the word very there?
To emphasise it.
Yeah, to emphasise that it's
The nature itself.
that it's really central to the essence of what the European project is.
Is it not redundant to say itself? Is it not sufficient to say the very nature of the European project? Is it not slightly too much?
Good question.
You could argue that. Because I used to work for newspapers and magazines, I was always told if you don't need a word, don't use it. So you could argue that it is redundant. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it there. But it does sound like perhaps over egging the pudding. Are you familiar with that? Are you familiar with that expression, to over egg the pudding? So what do you think it means?
To add too many eggs.
Too good.
Yeah. Well, it could. It's an idiom. It just means to go over the top.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the last one.
Spur.
Yes, to spur similar movements. Where does it come from? Yes. You could explain it anyway. Yeah.
So it's actually the start of the movement, to start the movements rather than to.
No.
Yeah.
It means
It's like-
again to be given momentum, or because when you're already on the horse, to spur it on means to make it go
Also
faster.
To ride faster?
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
But we often talk about people being spurred on. Okay. Does anybody want to ask anything else about this, about the language here? Susanna, what do you think about this prospect of Catalonia seceding from from Spain. Does it concern you?
Not really. I would go to Barcelona anyway.
Okay.
No, I don't know. I really don't know. And I think that in the light of recent developments, it's hard to say whether this secessionist movement will gain momentum or not.
I mean, do you?
And I think that what is going on around Europe, we need more unification rather than.
You know, what is going on around Europe, or?
I mean, the threats that are around us,
Mhm.
the terrorist threat, the need to strengthen the external border and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, you know, for sure we can come on to that perhaps when we talk about refugees.
Because once you are, what's the word, fragmented, you really can't control things so easily.
Okay. So you think it could be potentially dangerous if Spain was to begin to fragment?
Yeah.
No, it's quite controversial. I think it's right the other hand round, because
It's the other way round.
other way around.
Mhm.
If you have a smaller territory, less people, you can control the territory and the people more efficiently than if you have a large territory. It's more difficult to
Yeah.
keep the control centralized.
Oh no, my opinion stems from the fact that I just came back from Brussels and I've been quite spooked by the recent situation, and it is actually a direct result of the fragmentation that is present in Belgium and that has been present in Belgium. Because there is no city of Brussels, there are 19 municipalities, 6 different police forces that do not cooperate. That's why it became the terrorist haven, because it was quite easy to operate under the radar. That's what I meant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't wish anything bad to Catalonia or anyone else who would like to go alone.
Go it alone.
Go
it alone.
Go it alone.
Yeah, go it alone.
But yeah, I think that at this point in time we need more unification than anything else.
I should also say, Renata, instead of keep the control, first of all, we wouldn't really use the article with control here, but simply centralise control. Seems better. Eva, what do you think?
Yes, maybe what I find slightly disturbing about this article is the communication between the central government and Catalonian government. There's simply very little communication, there seems to be, and the communication that there is quite negative. So it seems to me that those two sides don't really want to negotiate. Normally,
They don't want to negotiate.
yeah, it seems to me from the article that they are no longer on speaking terms. It's just, what Catalonia does, they do it on their own without any sanction from the central government, and there seems to be some potential clash in the future, I think.
Or potential for clashing. Perhaps some potential for clashing in the future.
For clashing.
Yes.
I think that there is a certain parallel between Catalonia and Spain and Czechoslovakia, former Czechoslovakia, because if somebody doesn't want to stay within the state, you can't keep him.
There are parallels. You'd probably say, rather than say a certain parallel, you'd probably say there are certain parallels. And if someone wants to, so do you agree, Ivana, if some state wants to leave, you cannot keep them?
I think that people are influenced by media and by
The media.
And they are really manipulated to think that Catalonia should be independent. I agree with Susanna that we should unify rather than separate. And I agree with Renata in the sense that the individual layers of control, authorities should cooperate, they should communicate, and in this way it could work, of course, to some extent, but definitely we should not become fragmented. And as to your question whether we should let the seceding parts become independent, it's very hard because most of the time it's just political issue, and
A political
it
issue.
is a political issue, and people don't really want to separate unless they are really manipulated to think they should separate.
Okay.
Become separated from them.
Well, you can, or you can talk about breaking away.
Or
Typically, we
breaking away,
talk
breaking
about
apart.
to break away.
Break away. To some extent.
Then you should really use the statistics. I mean, once you become independent, you have to buy all the duties. I don't think it's more expensive actually, so it's not sure that you'll get a bigger chunk of your own income.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's emphasized at all. That's the point, it's political debate rather than factual.
And
Like ordinary people are not interested in separation. I think it is natural of people to
natural for people.
To communicate with each other, to stay in a certain group, to join some groups. We are social creatures, so I have to say that. And we don't want to separate.
So you think it's more natural for people to want to affiliate than to separate?
Yes.
And they contribute. I don't know. I can also see their argument, because they contribute more. They're quite rich, Barcelona, and they have to pay for the poor regions. So I don't know. I can also understand why they want to.
Yes, but that's the economic reason. That's the high level or the global level of thinking, but not I don't know. When I did, until I had children, I had different opinions. But now, for me, what is important is to live a common life without any threats.
When you say
security.
a common life, what do you mean?
Like ordinary
An
life,
ordinary one.
without any politics. Actually,
Just
and
in,
yes, you are right. It is an issue, the finances, but on the other hand, it is made into a great bubble due to the media. Probably people would not think about that all that much if they were not exposed to that all the time, if it was not debated in the media all the time.
I just want to go back to this use of the word common, because there are sometimes it's appropriate to use and sometimes it's not. If you can talk about a problem, it's very common, or it could be an opinion. It's very common for people to think that, and of course, there's a typical expression actually comes from. Have you heard of this?
No.
Well, this actually.
Is it like communal land? Is it land which belongs to the community or something like that?
It also is. It does also mean a piece of land that belongs to the community. But that's something different. This actually comes from like ornithology or something. But it's very typically used. So you could say like the sparrow or something, the common or garden sparrow. That's where it came from, as it can be found in your garden. But now, when people use common or garden, you can use it as just a sort of general
But if you say it's a garden variety of something, then it means common, doesn't it?
Yeah,
No,
I guess so.
Yeah.
But you could use this with anything. You know, you could talk about your smartphone. Oh, is it a really special one? Is it an iPhone? You know, it's just a common or garden smartphone. Just like the basic type or the basic model.
And the word ordinary, is it something like common? Can
It
you use-
is. But yeah, you would more likely talk about an ordinary life. You wouldn't so much talk about the common life. So there are just some expressions where it's used. You know, you could say I'm just an ordinary guy, but I wouldn't say I'm a common guy. And in fact, it would have quite negative connotations, because if you describe a person as common, it's saying they have very, very crude manners. It's in British English. Yeah. So yeah, to be perfectly honest, what's he like? Describe him to me. He's just an ordinary guy. That's fine. What's he like? Oh, he's common. It would be. No. But that's British, really, very British. Okay. So is this okay? I mean, we've got, I think, two major points here about the media. For one thing, do you all agree, Renata? Do you agree that without the media inflating these issues, people wouldn't really be motivated to separate?
It's hard to say that because I don't feel that I am quite immune as for the impact of the media on me, but I try not to take it so seriously if I am to read something or
So you-
to listen to something, because I don't really take much effort to
So,
look for
okay.
this kind of news.
So you feel you're inured to the effects of the media?
Immune.
Inured. It's like to say somehow that you can't be affected by it.
Yeah, I feel that I just take it easy. I'm not so much interested in it. Whatever happens, I think I can always go to our cottage and live my ordinary life there.
Okay. Not your common life. And really, I'm not. You could say it doesn't interest me so much, or I'm not so interested. I know it's quite common to hear people say I'm not so much interested, but natives don't really say it. So it doesn't interest me so much. It's fine, but I'm not so interested, or I'm not much interested, actually. Well then, if fragmentation is a risk to union, to the European Union, isn't that an argument for closer union?
What do they call it? A two-speed Europe, or?
They did refer to it as a two-speed Europe, with or a two.
No,
Is that two?
it's too speedy Europe, yeah.
It's not something based on the article. I just.
Yeah, but there was a.
I just remember I heard it somewhere.
Yeah, but it does use it. Well, it would be more likely, actually, probably to talk about a two-tier. Yeah, if for example, this situation that they're talking about, where some countries are at the core and others are at the periphery, you could say it would be a two-tier Europe. Do you know when we use tiers normally?
Of course.
It could be with quarts or with cake. Quarts or with cake.
Cake.
Yes. So 1, 2, 3 tier cake. Yeah. Yeah, but that would be more. That would be more common than two-speed.
No, but I have to agree with my colleague. The term two-speed Europe is used quite often.
Yes.
Yeah, it could be.
My head is full of this nonsensical.
Well, is that an argument? For example, well, who would like to? Eva. There's quite a lot of questions about this European political union, or everything you need to know about European political union. Do you think you could summarise some of the main points? Quite technical.
Okay, so I think it is about the argument whether we actually need Europe to become closer, to become more integrated, or whether Europe is going the opposite direction. And I think it provides some information also about what the Commission does, what the Council of Ministers does, etc. So about the basic institutions of the European Union, also about the budget, the spending, how much money goes for what, about Parliament and the underlying problem of democratic deficit. And I think the last question is quite interesting. So whether a new Parliament should be set up just for the Eurozone.
The last question.
The last question. The last question.
And whether a new Parliament should be set up for the Eurozone.
Yes, I think so. I think just for the Eurozone. I don't know. Maybe I read it too quickly.
No, you're right.
And the group.
Is it?
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, there would be too many parliaments. So I think just one is sufficient. Because there are many committees anyway, so I think that Eurozone members can, discuss those issues in those committees, and they do not really need a new parliament. And I think that it would be against the wishes of the people, because people generally think that the European structure is too complicated anyway, so I don't think this could really gain much support from the public.
One point. Actually, I think you use your language very accurately, but you said going the opposite direction. Should be going in the opposite direction or going the opposite way.
The opposite way,
No. Okay. Ivana, are you in favour of closer European Union, a federal Europe, for example?
I don't know. I tend to think it would be better to have a federal state. Although I cannot imagine that how much feasible this idea is.
How feasible it is.
This idea is. But I think it's better than a fragmented Europe.
Than a fragmented Europe. Joelle, do you agree?
Yes, I agree.
That's today's yes, I agree.
These issues are so complicated for me. I can only agree. I never thought about these problems.
Okay. Well, Susanna, what do you think?
Becoming more pro-European.
You're sorry?
Because of the time, but it's from The Economist, which is a British publication, and I think that there are some inaccuracies
Okay.
in the text, for example, about the workings of the European Parliament or about the EU taxation. It's either not researched thoroughly or it's written like this on purpose. But I had another point last Wednesday in Brussels, in Palais de Beaux-Arts, which is our equivalent of Rudolfino, for example, or the National Theatre.
National
Theatre. After everybody was so anxious. There was actually an event when Jean-Claude Juncker came and he sat on the stage. It was free for everyone. It was packed to the rafters. There was simultaneous interpreting into 5 languages, I think. And leading journalists were allowed to ask questions, and also members of the public. And this is Europe for me, because he is the highest ranking official, and he came and he was not only willing but also able to answer well even mundane questions, and to find a way how to explain even complicated budgetary issues to people. And on the other hand, the questions ranged from hysterical and anxious to actually very well informed. So I'd say that there is a group of citizens who actually does care and is able to ask detailed questions and gets an answer, and that's important.
Okay. What would you take issue with in this? Because in The Economist, it's more likely to be, as you say, if it's inaccurate, it's either deliberate or poorly researched. It's more likely to be because of the political slant of The Economist, which would tend to be somewhat right of centre.
For example, about the working of the groups, or so-called groups or fractions in the parliament. But these groups tend to lack a clear program of their own, and may fail to reflect the way that their underlying national politics work. I can say that these groups actually do have a very clear program, and they react to... The first part of the sentence is not exactly accurate. And also they have their own program. It's not their only duty to react to their national politics.
It's national.
MEPs are supposed to have their own agenda, not just to follow blindly their party affiliation. So that's one. And then the working group is reportedly exploring new proposals for direct EU taxation. It's not even possible, because in the Lisbon Treaty, taxation is solely the responsibility of the nation states. So there is no point. It would take another change of the treaty.
This particular sentence could be kind of an example of possibly something to do with the political slant of The Economist, because it says reportedly. So what does that allow them to do?
So basically they have no idea, but it looks good on paper.
Well, if you say something reportedly here, so it could mean anyone at all who says it could be happening. And it's a kind of, I think it's a typical...
There's a rumour.
Yeah, but it's a typical get out for someone writing in a newspaper, that they can always, if someone complains about that and says it's not accurate, they can always say, we said reportedly, we didn't say it was going to happen, or there were definitely plans. It's sort of one step up from allegedly.
What's the point?
Well, I mean, if there is a difference between reportedly and allegedly. You use allegedly for things that you are saying are negative. Okay. Reportedly, it could be for anything, whether you approve of it or disapprove. So, Renata, do you think that we should have closer European Union? Would you support a federal Europe, or something closer to the United States, like the United States of Europe?
I thought we were integrated enough as nations in some kind of union. I don't see the point why we should be organized more closer.
More closely. I don't see the point of organising more closely, or I don't see why we should organise more closely. It's a lot of people in Britain believe that this is secretly the plan of European governments and even the British government. You know, there's a Labour MP called, her name's Diane Abbott, and she said that she was told very clearly while Labour were in government that what she must understand was the ultimate goal is a single European nation, or something like the United States.
She was told by whom?
Reportedly. I guess in British politics we would say she was told by the men in grey suits.
In the corridors of power.
In the corridors of power, yes. Would you support it generally? Emma, would you generally support the idea of a United States of Europe?
No, I think that we are in Europe in a different situation than the United States, because they started from scratch. They basically decimated the Native Americans, and then they were free to establish their own country. But in Europe, we have got different states, different nations, and those are so different and fundamentally different that I don't think it is possible. And I think it will not be supported by the public. And it's quite important, I think, to be supported by the public. So I'm pro-European, I have to say, but I think that we need some time maybe to consider where Europe should be heading, and definitely not rush into more integration, because people simply do not want it.
Using the term decimated, you could use the term decimated, but it might be more dramatic than that. What does decimation really mean?
Eradication?
Well, you could use it to talk about that sort of slaughter. Historically, I believe it came from the Roman legions, that their punishment for failure in the battlefield could be decimation, which would mean every 10th man would be killed. So,
Well, that's a good one.
So, some people would argue that even decimated isn't strong enough for what they did, because I'm pretty sure more than 10% of the Native Americans were wiped out. But yeah, you could use it. Are those cultural differences enough to make it impractical?
I think that's a big hurdle to further integration or further unification.
Well,
I think it is obvious, even in the refugee crisis, that there are differences, and these differences stem from the cultural differences.
Yes. Well, going on to the refugee crisis. Renata, what are the main points of this?
May I have a question?
Yeah, ask a question. Remember, I have a question, or can I ask a question? Not may I have a question.
Okay. Question?
Uh-huh.
And the regulations it writes, it should be plural or singular? Because it's always a regulation, in my opinion. About all the money we spend and the regulations it writes. About the punchlines.
And you think it should be singular?
I'm asking.
No, you can use regulation as a collective noun, but here they're talking about individual regulations. You know, we commonly talk about rules and regulations, even though they're more or less synonymous, but as an expression. But as an expression, we often use them together. But yeah. So, yeah, and it's often very common to talk about over-regulation.
Yes.
For example. Yes. Sorry, I should have asked, are there any other issues of language in this before we move on? Oh, sorry, just before we move on to yeah.
task was to say what the refugee crisis article was about.
Yes.
I think it's about the disagreements of the individual member states of the European Union, how to deal with the crisis,
Mm-hmm.
how to resolve it.
And
The different approach of the old European countries and the new ones.
okay, different approaches. The different approaches.
Different approaches.
Uh-huh. So why could it bring about the breakup of the EU according to this? Because I mean the headline says how Europe's alarming lack of unity over the issue could bring about the breakup of the EU.
I think it's breaking up of the EU can be caused by some heavy disagreements between these countries. Like it says the North against the South, the East against the West, whether Germans should have the leading role or should behave the same way as the others. And I think Germany particularly has a kind of bad feeling about their past, so they try to maybe compensate it with...
Or overcompensate, we could say it. Okay.
Yeah.
You told me.
They're just pragmatic. You know, they need workforce.
Exactly. Yeah, if you add up the figures.
So on the point of heavy disagreement, would you say heavy disagreement? Sounds okay, but more likely just a strong disagreement. Or if you want to be stronger, you might even say a bitter disagreement, but that's much stronger.
And it is for me it was very good to read this article because then I could see how the other countries or how people who are not Czech, how they perceive us,
Mm-hmm.
how we are perceived in Europe, and I was quite ashamed. Although I don't share the attitude or the opinion on the crisis of our president or the other authorities of the Czech Republic, I am ashamed for the case that they speak on behalf of us and that their ideas are so ashamed.
Well, you could say I'm ashamed that they speak for us, or I'm ashamed of the fact that they speak for us. Do you all agree? Was there one question I was going to ask? Because Ivana, you mentioned the culture in reference to these refugees. Is it acceptable for a country to choose not to accept refugees or asylum seekers based on their religion? Because that's what we're talking about, really, isn't it?
That's
And then,
complex question.
what is a
Difficult
complex?
to answer. I really don't know. I think that we should accept them. Or if the obstacle should not be religion. The reason why we don't accept them should not be religion. But I've had a very interesting interview on the Czech radio with Petra Procházková, who accompanied the people, Syrian and other asylum seekers, on their journey to Europe. It was so interesting. She described how they get the boat, how the Turkish authorities react and respond to the crisis. and it was really eye-opening.
Well, you could say eye-opening.
Eye-opening.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Sorry?
In what sense?
Well, because until recently I just thought that these people, first of all, Turkey, well, I don't know how to explain that. There were many striking things. For example, when she described that the people actually get the boat, they have never been on the sea. There's no one who would drive the boat, or who would actually
Well, either sail the
steer.
boat. It could be. It can even be pilot the boat or sail the boat. Yeah.
sail the boat.
Yeah.
So she described the situation. She said that
And remember,
there were like the boats are only for 12 people, but usually there are like 50 people on board. There are children, and they don't have any knowledge about sailing. So sometimes they go the double the distance they should, because they have no navigation skills.
or navigational skills. Yeah.
Navigation skills. She described how people drown because of panic, because there were like 50 people, then all of a sudden a child falls down to the sea.
Or falls into the sea.
Falls into the sea, and the parents, of course, jump into the sea to save them, and the boat is then wobbly, yeah, that more and more people fall into the sea, and that's the reason why there are these disasters. She also described that the people
Well, described how. You wouldn't say she described that. You could say she described how.
She described how the people seeking asylum, or what they think about Europe, that they think that Europe will receive them with open arms. In Turkey, they live in luxurious hotels, and they think that they will be received warmly also in other parts of Europe. They don't expect any animosity. And the commentator, the interviewer, asked the journalist whether she joined them on the boat, and she said, well, I didn't, because actually I wouldn't pay 1,200 euros for such a journey, because all my journey through from the scratch until the end cost 1,200. So why would I pay more than 25 euros, which is the actual cost of the journey? So I'm sort of course, people are fleeing because they are scared, but on the other hand, it is strange because they have so much money to go to Europe, so much money that none of us would pay for this journey. And she also described that there are two rumors going around Afghanistan and Syria, and that the first one is that they would that Europe will not receive anyone after the 1st of January 2016. And the second rumor is that from start of 2016 there will be war in Afghanistan. So these are two rumors that actually make people go to Europe and leave as soon as possible. And that's why there is such an influx of people. So it was really eye-opening for me because I couldn't actually make any or have any opinion on that because I didn't have so much information, so much information to judge. But thanks to Petra, I got at least some, and I know that she is a reliable journalist.
Is there any idea, or has she any idea who is spreading these rumors?
I guess the mafia, actually.
The smugglers.
The smugglers, the smugglers.
And they use the term traffickers here.
Traffickers.
It's
Is it more formal? Because the economists use smugglers.
it's become quite common to use the term traffickers. It used to be applied to drug smuggling. We used to talk about drug trafficking, but now it's very common to talk about people trafficking. And I think probably they use the term trafficking because it sounds somehow more dehumanizing. Somehow it sounds more criminal than smuggling. Smuggling somehow can seem to have some kind of benign connotation depending on what it is.
And I think it's also because it's not just about smuggling. These people then usually fall victims to other types of crime. The real trafficking in human beings and other forms of exploitation.
Well, that's definitely true.
I think the trafficking is actually could be a bit higher registered than smuggling. No.
Yeah, exactly as I said. It sounds like there's more criminality. But you're right that typically before this crisis, when we talked about people trafficking, it was for them to be exploited, either as slaves or sexually exploited or something. Yeah.
But in this respect, I read an interesting article in the New Yorker, interesting by the selection of the main character. Again, a journalist followed a guy who went from Syria all the way to Sweden. And the point is, it was a young boy. Nothing really happened to his family other than it was quite difficult to go on living in Syria. And he left behind his mother and his young wife, started the route, several times was forced to go back, and every time he asked either his sister living in Emirates or his brother living in Sweden for more money. So if you made the sums, it cost him about €6,500 to get to Sweden. And it was not a desperate family. It was not a widowed mother with 3 unnourished children or something. It was a young lad fully capable of fighting or maybe even protecting his elderly mother and the wife whom he had left in Syria. And it just posed the question, do we really owe something to this guy? Or why doesn't he go to the Emirates? Why doesn't he go to join his sister living in, I don't know where, which state? It was really interesting.
Does it matter, Eva, if there are young, fit, healthy men? Should we have less sympathy for them?
Yeah, there should be definitely no discrimination based on religion or anything, so there should be none. But the criteria should be the same, so Europe obviously cannot take all the misery of the world, so there must be some restrictions, and also some other states may be put under some international pressure to take on some other refugees. And maybe we should pay more money to those countries surrounding Syria to be able to take more refugees, because in this way they will be able to go back to Syria once the conflict has been resolved, hopefully one day. Because I can't see any reason or any way how they would go back from Europe. And maybe there should be also some media campaign in Syria that it's not all rosy, it's not, life is not going to be so easy for them in Europe. They come with false expectations, I think.
Sorry, the reason I'm smiling is that when Romania and Bulgaria got their full accession to the European Union, the British Conservative government considered an advertising campaign in Bulgaria and Romania telling them that life in the UK was not so good. So it discouraged them from coming. Well, to play the devil's advocate though, a lot of Czechs I speak to are terrified of the prospect of Muslims coming to this country.
No, this is a bit ridiculous. I don't know, in my opinion. Because people are talking about 2,000 people, maybe 3,000 people, and 10 million people. I think it's really like a drop in the sea.
A drop in the ocean.
Or a drop in the ocean. I have to say it's absurd.
But politically, it's an issue. Would it be? I mean, would it be a threat to, or could it be a threat to social cohesion to have a large influx of people from a different culture?
As you said, it's a drop into the ocean. In the ocean, and we have a history with the Kosovo War, where we accepted many people. I don't know exact numbers, but they used to live with us for a couple of years, maybe some of them returned back after the war was resolved there, but I think some of them stayed here. So I think Czech Republic is not that big, that's true, but on the other hand, a couple of thousands of people, if they are well integrated and taken care of, yeah, something.
Remember, a couple of thousand, not a couple of thousands, a couple of thousand.
Couple of thousand.
Yeah.
So I think we should not have any problems with that, but of course, if politically someone wants to take this as an approach to people to get re-elected, then he can, of course. It's an issue.
On the other hand, I think that I don't know why, but we've got the feeling that we should feel ashamed of protecting our values, our traditional values. Why couldn't we protect our values, our Christian values? Protect theirs?
Or defend your values,
defend,
protect your values.
So why couldn't we? What's wrong about that? What's illicit?
Why can't we?
Yeah, I was talking to friends over the weekend, and I said that the first thing, you know that the Muslims moved into your street. The first sign is that immediately the windows are almost blocked, either by heavy curtains or just blanket basically put over the window, because the women are not allowed to walk out. I mean, with the real staunch Muslims, they are not allowed to walk out during the day, even maybe with the chaperone, maybe with this elderly lady following them. And then the windows stay lit up till 3 or 4 in the night, because when the men finally get back home, the family life starts, they cook, they talk, whatever. And I was sort of like talking about how I had this experience, and then I actually had to admit to myself, do I really think it's normal? You know, do I really want to see that on my street? And yeah, so I think integration has its limits. And also in the willingness of other people to integrate with us.
Does that though threaten the values of anyone in the street if they keep the curtains closed?
No, but it's a depiction of a set of beliefs that wouldn't allow women to walk freely on the streets. That I have a problem with that, not with the curtains.
But they will have to send their children to schools. And I can imagine that they will, I think the key issue is really to integrate those people well. If they are integrated. Because there are many Muslims in the UK, I understand that.
Many.
Most, I would say 99%.
But are they integrated?
Are they integrated? That's my question.
I would say not fully integrated. In Glasgow, where I'm from, we have always had a large Muslim community. But one thing I always think is worth mentioning is this whole idea of fear of Islam is really pretty new, because when I was growing up in Glasgow, nobody was afraid of the Muslim community at all. And in fact, it is kind of cliched to say it, but typically they were more law-abiding than the mainstream community, than the sort of white indigenous community. And they certainly typically did not fully integrate, which was partly because they wanted to associate with people like them who shared their values. Partly it's because I don't think you would say that the sort of white majority really embraced this type of immigration. So I think, in a sense, there was, yes, a natural sort of sense of insularity amongst the Muslims, and not only the Muslims, either, you know, the Indian, which was typically Hindus and even Sikh, all the Asian communities. But also, I think there was an element of rejection by the white mainstream community. You have to remember, British people were brought up with a sense of empire, and I think even now a lot of British people struggle with the notion that the people from the colonies are their social and intellectual equals. You know, I really think that there is still that sense that, you know, we used to rule their country.
Is it called entitlement? The sense of entitlement? Well,
a sense of entitlement could stretch. It could be used much more broadly. If you have a sense of entitlement, it could be just any time you really believe that things that other people would consider privileges should be yours by right. So there's no question that there was a lack of integration, but on the other hand, in my opinion, without any external political factors, it didn't seem to be felt as a social problem. So
I think the situation in the Muslim community in the world must have changed a lot these days. They got fanatized.
Well, we could talk about being radicalized. This is very common for people to talk about being radicalized. Yes. Excuse me.
So I think we are talking about different Islam than it was, I don't know, 20 years ago.
It definitely is the case. I think it's quite important to recognise that Islam, much like Christianity, has its fundamentalist elements. You know, there are parts of the United States where people still handle snakes. You know, they literally, to prove their faith, they pick up rattlesnakes and things like this. You know.
And there are men who have got 4 wives. I can see quite a lot of parallels, you know, with Islam and the communities in Utah, the Mormons.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be maybe it's a question of choice. You know, the women still have a choice, whereas in Saudi Arabia they do not really have a choice, but still.
I think, you know, one of the criticisms of the Muslim community in Britain, though, and criticism of the authorities, is that it was common for them not to emphasise the education of their daughters. And again, that's not just the Muslim communities, it would be I think it's something more from the people from the Indian subcontinent rather than a religious issue. And that the authorities may have turned a blind eye to that in the past. That teachers would report that this girl doesn't come to school and she's been kept at home with the parents' knowledge, and whereas somebody else would probably be prosecuted for not sending their children to school, they often said, well, that's within their cultures.
That's what the teachers said last week. I was at the Committee of Regions, and there are also teachers, members of the... And they said that when in Marseille and in some other city, when the pupils were asked to observe the minute of silence, the Muslim pupils refused to stand up and observe it. And they asked the rhetorical question, what do you do then as a teacher in the classroom? How do you respond? Do you let it slip, or do you report them? It's really, yeah.
That's a question of being humane rather than that there's no divide between the religions. So I think teachers should somehow respond to that and say to children that they should obey in that.
Yeah. You know, I fully agree with that. It was interesting. You know, it goes all the way down to the very basic level of human interaction. And then, you know, if I were a teacher facing the classroom of Muslim teenagers, I don't think I would be too tough on them, frankly. That's true.
You know, on the other hand, a lot of Muslims do stress that Islam puts a lot of emphasis on education. And I had a Turkish Muslim student. She was very, very highly educated. Actually, she was better read in classical English literature than I am. And she described a much more liberal society, but with extreme restrictions as well. So again, I think in Turkey they would expect their daughters to be educated, so it's not necessarily to do with Islam. So, already though, this issue of social cohesion, this issue of social cohesion, it does seem to be somehow relevant. So, would you advocate, Ivana, for example, controlling the numbers of non-Christians or Muslim immigrants?
I don't know. I think we should solve the problem in Syria and in Afghanistan first. Again, these are ordinary people probably, who just want to live their ordinary lives. So there are these rumors, that's why they are emigrating in the perspective. Can you restrict it? Can you restrict the number of people? I don't know whether it is possible in practice. I know we can have some quota agreed, but will it work in practice? I don't know.
Well, in general, are the numbers coming to Europe? Do they worry you? The numbers of refugees that are coming at this moment in time, does it worry you? Do you think that it is a threat to Europe? We've already got restrictions on borders, which we didn't have a few years ago with the Schengen Agreement. You have to remove those restrictions on borders. We're already seeing restrictions coming up. Some people are talking about even the typical expression "Fortress Europe," sort of strengthening all of Europe's outer borders. Susanna, what do you think?
It does worry me, not in a xenophobic sense of word, but yes, these are just sheer numbers. Part of that population has much higher birth rate than the indigenous European population has. And when I see the failed result of failed integration in Belgium, then yes, it is something to worry about. Because we are not prepared. If we were better informed, or if we knew what to expect, how to relate to these people, then I would feel more secure. But I lack any guidance from anyone. And yes, when I see Brussels, I've been living there for 10 years, then in my opinion it's a failed integration, not a real one. And this could happen easily in our society or in our country as well.
Do you still have a home in Brussels?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And what about the fact that during the communist era, a lot of people in Western Europe were very afraid of communists, and even might have thought that defectors may have been spies and wanted to change our way of life. There's an interesting case, I know we only have a few minutes, but where the British government actually came very close to being overthrown in a military coup. And it's a story that's not often told, but it's properly sourced now, that there was a rumour that the Soviets had managed to infiltrate the British government to the extent that they replaced the leader of the Labour Party with an agent. And the leader of the Labour Party died suddenly and was replaced by Harold Wilson. And a rumour circulated that it had been put about by a KGB defector. And it's now accepted that there were even high-level talks amongst the military and certain aristocrats prepared to remove the government because they thought that Harold Wilson was a Soviet, he was a KGB agent. And they even occupied Heathrow Airport without informing the government. And they said it was just an anti-terrorism security alert. This was in the 1970s. Yes. Do you ever think about how people might have responded to people from Czechoslovakia or any of the Warsaw Pact countries? Like, do you ever think there could be parallels between the fear of communism that was engendered in us and the fear of Islam that there is now? No.
I can't imagine because this is a topical issue. 1970s, or way back in the time, so I can't see the parallel between the two issues.
Well, the way people in Warsaw Pact countries were represented, they were represented as being typically very atheistic, and British society was far more religious at that time, and they thought there was something kind of abnormal about atheism. Certainly like state-sponsored atheism.
But it was still the same Christianity-based civilization. This is different, I think. It's a different category, I think.
I'm just talking about the representation, because we were given a picture, we were given an image of this sort of atheistic state control where people were expected never to dissent, never to disagree, just to follow the state blindly. And I guess it's probably not an image you would recognise of the people you knew at the time. Just seems interesting to me because, some people say that we always have to have an enemy. And when I was young, it was fear of communism, and now it's fear of Islam. All right. Well,
it's actually fear of change, or change in general, because I don't want my children to live in a Muslim state. Or in a country with a Muslim majority. That's my fear.
Is it a real problem? Do you think it's really a problem? Because even if you look at countries like the Netherlands, where a substantial population, they have no fears of that. I think, at least the majority.
I don't know. I really don't know.
But you're right that after communism we learned we shouldn't do some things in public spaces like speak openly or speak your mind. Some things were unavailable, and for me, on everyday level, the impact of Muslim immigration is similar because you cease to go to parks, you cease to use the public transport, you cease to go to the cinema. Not only because there is a terrorism threat, but also because it's these people. They have a different code of conduct in public spaces, so it's not free for you any longer, or free of worry. So in that level it's similar, there is a parallel with communism, with living under communism. Because again, you were restricted in some of your activities, and this is similar. It's my,
Well, maybe I'm just influenced by my personal bad experience with Muslims, or not Muslims, but Muslims. When somebody threatened me to kill me.
Someone actually threatened to kill you?
Yeah, so that's why I'm probably
My Flemish friends have kids in now predominantly Muslim neighborhood. It started as a Flemish part of Brussels, and their daughters do not wear skirts, they do not wear iPhone or iPad headphones around their head because they got harassed, and it's real, and it's every day. Yeah. So they bought this machine you can walk on at home because they don't really go jogging into a park any longer. And it's actually a European city, and it's in the middle of the European city, and it's all very well to say that we don't fear them, but actually they have to take these precautions. Yeah.
There have been some instances in London of a kind of self-appointed religious police in some areas going out and reproaching women for the way they dress. Right. Well, I'm conscious of the fact that the time is up. Is there anything else before we finish?
There could be a lot.
Yeah.